Hi, everybody. So I guess my job is to ask you how you're feeling. You think I'm kidding. I have to just say before I start that I did not create the title for my presentation. I have to put the onus there on Danielle. I would probably get fired from this presentation title. Just kidding. So I'm going to start off with a quote. Can I ask everyone to get some, maybe good posture in your seats? Some of you are like, take a nice inhale maybe, just get settled and just think about how this quote resonates with you. And I'll just read it. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. What do we think? Does it resonate with you at all? Or are you thinking, well, I'm pretty smart, right? My students at Yale say that a lot. Like, what do you mean nobody cares how much you know? I know everything. I'm like, well, maybe about some things. Probably not about how to interact very well, but. And, you know, my work is primarily in education. So I work with school systems to help bring the principles of emotional intelligence into what I call the immune system of the way the school operates, from how leaders lead, to how teachers teach, to how students learn, to how parents parent. And what I've learned over the years is that this quote really is the truth for the way education works. As a 47-year-old psychologist, professor, I went back to the middle school that I attended about 5 years ago after 33 years ago of bullying. I was a pretty horrifically bullied kid. And when I went back to my school, I had no memories of anything I learned. I had no memories of even many of my peers. I couldn't remember any teacher's name, but I remember how I felt walking in that hallway, like the terror and the fear. And I remember thinking, why didn't anybody ever ask me how I felt? Why didn't anyone ever attend to my feelings? Hence now I spend my whole life running around the world getting everybody to talk about their feelings. So one tool that we developed to help people become aware of feelings just at the basic level is called the mood meter. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about this right now. All of you got some email or whatever notice you got here at Google about a presentation on emotional intelligence, and you're here now, which is wonderful. So my question for you is, how are you feeling right now? Not about life. -5 would be you're having thoughts something like, really? I have to listen to this guy for a whole hour? Like that's what we do now at Google? We have people come talk about feelings? Maybe you're there. Maybe you're at -3 in pleasantness. You're having thoughts or something like, you know, whatever. Maybe you're neutral. I live in Connecticut now. I feel like that's the state of our entire state, right? We're like the neutral state. Not a lot of emotion. Maybe you're at +3. You're thinking to yourself, my goodness, I get to sit in a room with a guy from Connecticut who's going to talk about feelings. Or maybe you're at +5. Like there are no words in the English language dictionary, right, to describe the feeling you're having right now. So please give yourself a number from -5 to +5 in terms of your current level of pleasantness. On the y-axis, it says energy. So energy has to do literally with how much activation you have going on. +5 is you're so activated you just can't contain yourself. -5 is you're in your deepest pool of despair. -5, you feel like you're being pulled into the ground. +5 is you are just so highly energized you can't contain your body. Where's your energy right now? Obviously, we create our mood meter from these two axes. So we got yellow, red, blue, and green. Let me just see where you are. How many of you are feeling yellow right now? High energy and pleasant. Okay, that's impressive. How many of you are green? You're pleasant, but your energy is kind of low. How many of you are in the blue or red today? The 3 people sitting in the back row, okay. At least you got good distance from me, that's good. Now, the question is, are we being authentic and honest right now? Is it true that 85 to 90% of the room is actually feeling, quote unquote, yellow and green? Highly doubtful. I mean, maybe life here is that amazing. I live in Connecticut. The East Coast is not known for its yellow and green feelings. What I want you to do right now is take about 3 seconds and convert your quadrant to a word. Take 3 seconds, please. What is the word that best describes your current feeling? All right, freeze. Give me an honest raise of hands. How many of you had some trouble finding the precise word? Hands up high, like really high. Please look around the room, everybody. So it's interesting. I mean, at least it is to me. Here we are, a room filled with highly educated people who are emotionally illiterate. Now, you're like, I don't like this guy already. I'm going to ask you take a second. What are your hypotheses around that? What do you think? Why would it be? I mean, truthfully, you're all highly educated people. Why would you not be able to find a word to describe how you're feeling? Yes?
There's many feelings happening at the same time.
Like how many?
Like 14.
Wow. Okay, well, we have treatment for that. All right. You're right, though. You may be feeling more than one emotion. 14 is a lot, but yeah.
I think that the way that our success is structured rewards us for divorcing intelligence and strategy from our emotions.
Okay, so like we're in a society that just says like put the feelings aside. So maybe you haven't developed your vocabulary for it because you haven't attended to it. Any other hypotheses? Yeah.
There's a natural resistance to collapsing the complexity of your internal states into a few words or colors.
Uh-huh. So there's this. Repeat that, please.
I said there's a natural resistance to collapsing the complexities of your internal states to words and colors.
All right, so maybe it's like we're just way too dynamic to put ourselves into one quadrant or one feeling word. Great point. Yeah, last one.
I think it's also very difficult to just have one feeling at any given time.
Yep.
You can't think of one word and be like, actually, I'm also this. Right?
Yep. So it may be around how where your focus is, right? If I ask you how you're feeling in life, that's a very big question. If I ask you how you're feeling about attending a talk on emotional intelligence, it might help you be more precise, potentially. Now, all right, all of you are here for an hour. That's the time of the presentation. How many of you will have some trouble staying focused for a whole hour? Raise your hand. Okay, wonderful. Great, I have a room filled with attention deficit disorder. Just what I hope for in life. So I'm going to give you an ideal spot to be. I would like you to be around +1 for my presentation. I'm going to set an emotion goal for you. I'm going to call that the spot of joyful effort. And what I'd like you to do is think about where you are in reference to that point and what strategy might best serve you to kind of stay there for the next 45 minutes. What strategy will best serve you? Who feels they have an effective strategy? No one. Okay, I'll be back. Yeah,
Just being relaxed.
just being relaxed.
Challenging things that the speaker says.
That's great. That's what I want the critical person in the room. Like, I don't like what he just said. I'm going to argue that one. Yeah.
I mean, if you can see how it helps you in life, you would become interested and you would stay.
So make it relevant to your life.
I was actually going to say the opposite of his, which was being receptive to new ideas.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take it outside.
All right, so one is going to be more critical. You're going to be open. You're going to be relaxed. You are going to make it relevant to your life.
Focus.
You're going to just focus.
Yeah, keeping it.
Just, yes, sir.
Same idea, but to actually be present, to actually be in the room. And
Just be in the room and be present. All right. So let's take this into the real world, because this is definitely not the real world. And let's imagine now I am what I do a lot. I go into a middle school here in Palo Alto, and I walk in, I'm saying, good morning, everybody. My name is Marc. I'm going to be your teacher today. And I know your teacher left me the script. We're going to be doing the Roman oligarchy today. Okay, so what I want you to do, I know that my goal is for you to be in that kind of low yellow. And I'm going to just offer you some strategies. Just chill. Just relax and be here. Okay? I need you to make this relevant to your life. If that doesn't work, just be open. And what I really want you to do is just focus. Right? There is no past. We know the future is like whatever. So just be here with me now. Be here in the present moment. All right, ready to go? What do you think? How effective are those strategies? So I want you to just take a moment and think about it. Will those strategies work? How many of you ever asked someone to calm down? All right, and how many of you in the history of asking someone to calm down have found that it really works? Right, like with your partner, like, honey, I love you, but like, I just need you to calm down. Right?
When I want to make someone mad, that's what I say.
See, there you go. So telling someone to strategize is complex. Anything else that you see wrong with those strategies or potentially right? Yeah.
Well, you're putting the onus of us being attentive on us and not on both of us.
Oh, good point. You actually bring up a really good point, which is that emotions are not necessarily always self-regulated, right? That we are in relationship and they are co-regulated. Think about that, right? Whether it's a device that you're in the room with or whether it's a human being, right? You're in a co-regulation process. Because how I present the facial expressions, body language, vocal tones, the way I present myself will influence and be contagious in many ways to your feelings, which will then in turn come back to me. So we're in this dynamic reciprocal relationship right now, whether we're conscious of it or not. So as your teacher right now, I am influencing how you're feeling, which is a form of self-regulation or co-regulation. Other points?
Maybe those speaker, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So you're getting at the specificity, right? You can't just say be present or be focused or be calm. Like, what do you do to be calm? What do you do to be present? Everyone here just said that they're going to have attention problems. So what is the actual mental strategy that you're engaging in to manage the feeling or to create the feeling? All right, everyone, sit up straight in your seats for a moment, please. Take a nice long inhale and a nice exhale. And if you're comfortable, close your eyes. If not, not a problem. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. You're probably way asleep. It's 6 maybe or 7 o'clock in the morning. You wake up. How do you feel? This is internal talk right now. As you wake up each morning, typical day, how do you feel? It's breakfast time. Are you eating breakfast at home or are you waiting to get to work? Are you having a good cup of coffee, a bad cup of coffee? How do you feel when you do your morning routine? All right, you're on your way to work. Traffic, no traffic, public transportation. How do you feel? What are you doing on your way to work? Texting like you shouldn't be? Phone calls? Radio? All right, you arrive at work. You walk around. How do you feel? Meeting 1, meeting 2, meeting 3, meeting 4, meeting 5, meeting 6, meeting 7, meeting 8, meeting 9, meeting 10. Take yourself through those meetings. Emails, no emails. Phone calls, no phone calls. Text, no text. How do you feel? Lunchtime. Healthy, unhealthy? Relaxed, stressful? Are you chewing or are you just swallowing? How do you feel at lunch? Who are you with? Are you alone or with others? Is it enjoyable or are you under pressure? Okay, it's after lunch. More meetings, more emails, more meetings, more emails. Distractions. How are you feeling in the afternoon? All right, you're leaving work. What time is it? And where are you going? Exercise, no exercise? Oh, no time for exercise. Kids, no kids. Partner, no partner. Family, no family. What's the afternoon like and how are you feeling? All right, you get home. Who's there? Are you alone or with other people? What's your evening like? Are you watching America's Got Talent or not? Reading, not reading? What's your evening like and how are you feeling most evenings? All right, it's time to go to bed. What's your evening routine like? What are you thinking about as you put yourself to sleep? Raise your hand if you think you had a couple hundred emotions throughout the day. You should all raise your hand because you probably had a couple thousand. We tend to experience around 3 to 5 emotions in a minute in some instances. How many of you saw, well, I won't ask you to raise your hands, but if I were to ask you to kind of plot yourself back on that mood meter, do you see yourself kind of living in one quadrant more throughout the day? Do you see yourself going throughout different quadrants, like yellow in the morning, then blue at the meeting, and then red here, and then green here, and then yellow here? So I've been really interested as a researcher as to what is the emotional life of our nation. And I've done 3 large studies over the last couple of years. The first one was a study with 45,000 high school students across the nation. And this is in collaboration with the pop singer Lady Gaga and her foundation, Born This Way Foundation. And what we did with funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we went across the United States and we looked at the state of emotional affairs. So I asked you to think about your feelings first. Now let's think about our nation's youth. Top 3 feelings that you believe our nation's high school, is public, private, and charter, are feeling. What do you think? Confused. Stressed. Fear. Insecure. Depressed. If I were to ask you to think about, thank you. Look, we got one optimist in the room. If you were to take the whole pie of 100%, what percent are positive emotions? What percent are negative emotions? What do you think? 2/3 negative? All right, well, here are the results. About 75% were negative. Top 3 feelings were tired, bored, and stressed. And we went a little deeper, and what we did was we looked at, all right, what percentage of the time are these kids experiencing these emotions? We found that they say they're stressed 80% of the time. Stressed 80% of the time, bored 70% of the time. So I want you to think about like what's happening. If you want to think about innovation and creativity, right? What happens if you're in an environment where you're feeling tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed, tired, bored, and stressed? Now, as a professor at a pretty prestigious place, I was curious, like, what's the state of emotional affairs of the brightest crayons in the box? So I did a study last year with undergrads. And here's the state of affairs at Yale. Looks a little similar, doesn't it? Stress, number 1, overwhelmed, anxious, frustrated. There's some excitement, which is good. But about 70% of the emotions they're experiencing. And then I said, I'm really interested in teachers, which is my primary area. I said, what is the state of affairs of America's educators? Frustrated, stressed, overwhelmed, some happiness and joyful, but if you look at all the little words, most of them are not the most pleasant words. And then, with funding from another foundation, I decided to look at 25,000 people across the entire workforce. And here's what people across the United States feel at work. Stress is the number 1 feeling. Some other ones too, a little bit of motivation, busy, tired, engaged. And what we know from our work, right, is that there's the good stress and the bad stress. I actually like to hire people who experience some stress. I like people who have slight anxiety problems. Right? They get stuff done. That's good stress. Unfortunately, when we do the more detailed analysis of what's happening, we find that it's mostly the bad stress that people are feeling. The stress that makes them not want to go to work. The stress that makes them not really be present at work. The stress that makes them feel physically sick. Now, for most of my career, I've been fighting people in terms of caring about emotions. Just for my own curiosity for people here at Google, how many of you believe that these feelings that you just saw, from tired, bored, and stressed, to stressed, overwhelmed, and anxious, to frustrated, stressed, and overwhelmed, to stressed, matter? And matter for important things about a person's life. So what I've learned in my research is that emotions matter for 5 big reasons. The first is attention, memory, and learning. So how you're feeling right now in my presentation is driving your presence, your focus, your engagement, your critical analysis. If you're bored, you're already somewhere else. You're already working on your project. If you're frustrated, you're back there thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? If you're stressed, you're thinking, how do I get out of here? So I think back now, 33 years ago when I was in middle school being bullied, and why I have no memory of anything that I learned, it was because, why? Because my brain was preoccupied with survival. Right? My brain was preoccupied with friendships, the need for friendships. So why would I want to be in a classroom, or why would I even care about learning about the Roman oligarchy when I'm afraid to walk home, or when I'm not having positive relationships? The second is decision making. I'm just curious, have any of you ever made a bad decision? Anyone like to just share publicly right now, to just let it out? So we know that how we feel shifts the way we make choices and decisions. I'll give you one example. So in my work with schools, I did a random experiment where I took educators. Let's imagine you're all teachers, and I just randomly assign you. Think about a day that was great, think about a day that was shitty. Great day, shitty day, great day, shitty day. Spend 5 minutes just writing about it. And then immediately thereafter, I gave every single educator in that study the same essay to read. Does anyone think there were differences in the grades they assigned? There was a 1 to 2 full grade difference in the way the teachers graded these students. Right? Just 5-minute little essay or writing assignment about good day, bad day, and then they graded the paper, and there were 1 to 2 full grade on average difference. I kind of knew it was going to happen because I know how emotions influence thinking. I think what interested me most was at the end of the study I said, do you believe that how you felt influenced the way you evaluated the essay? What percentage of the educators do you said, yeah, of course? Right. About 90% denied it. They said there's no way that how I felt would have influenced the way I evaluated that essay. And I think what that tells us is a lot. I think the primary thing is that our emotions are influencing and biasing the way we're seeing the world and the choices we're making, but it's happening outside of our conscious awareness. The third is relationship quality. Just curious, does anyone here have a colleague, do not look to your left or your right, or a relative who displays a lot of negative emotion? Someone who maybe walks around like this. Does anybody know something like that? Or they're very disagreeable. I don't like that idea. Why would you want to do it that way? Where I work, I get things like this. Professor Brackett, I've got a question. I'm not really sure you know the answer. Like, okay, not a problem, not a problem. Can't wait to grade your freaking paper. And so we know that emotions are signals. And they tell us to approach or to avoid. So when we think about people and we think about products, right, how they make us feel makes us want to move toward them or against. Does that resonate with everyone? So that, and that's a basic thing around survival, right? We don't approach the angry expression because we got to protect ourselves from it. We don't want to approach people who make us feel bored, right? Because we know we're just not going to want to be in relationship with them. People who display more positive emotions or who are more gentle in their expressions, right? They're saying, I'm here for you, right? If I walk around like this during my talk, right, immediately you're thinking, oh, this guy's not approachable. You know, he's got power issues. He's got control issues. The fourth is physical and mental health. So it's interesting. I was in a meeting last week, 2 weeks ago now, with a group of the counselors from universities around the state of Connecticut. And what the research now shows is that for the last 5 years, there has been a 20% increase in psychiatric hospitalizations for undergraduates. So it's gone up 20% a year for the last 5 years. What the research my own shows is that if we took the indicators of stress for adolescents and teenagers in our nation, they are greater than the stress levels of the adults who are raising them. So you can imagine what's going on in our nation right now when everyone is having this high activation emotion, right? Cortisol being released, confusion happening, inability to concentrate, lots of other things. The final piece is on creativity. Now, Google's not really known for that, right? How many of you believe that creativity is important? Good. That's good news. One thing interesting that we have found is that in our studies of young adults, that how they feel and their emotion skills is highly correlated with their ability to be creative. What we know from research is that cognitive ability correlates with creativity, but only up to an average IQ level. So most people think that creativity is a cognitive process, right? That the higher your IQ is, the more creative you are. What happens with cognitive ability is that it does this. So the question is, what's explaining the rest of the variance in creativity? And what we're finding is that it has to be emotion skills. Any hypotheses of why that might be the case? Why would emotion skills be responsible for the creative process and product?
I mean, you have to be relaxed to be creative. You can be stressed and creative at once.
Great point. So if you're under pressure all the time and your kind of default network is never able to kind of be activated, right, how can you be creative? What else?
Awareness of how the thing that you're creating is affecting you.
You and the people who are going to buy it. So putting emotion into the product, as well as imagining what the feelings are of the recipient of that product. What else?
If you're afraid of failing, you're probably not going to go very far with your creativity.
It's a great point. Now, how many of you have heard of this concept called grit? Yep. So what we find in our research is that grit is not correlated with creativity or academic achievement, but that the skills of emotion management are. And I think the reason for that is that, has anyone here ever, how many of you have actually attempted to be creative and have failed at an attempt? Yeah. How many of you have ever gotten negative feedback? How many of you have ever been frustrated with your own design of something? How many of you have ever been disappointed in your own work? So emotions are inherent in everything we do. And some people think, well, you just got to plow through it. But not really the case, right? The wider base our strategies are, the more effective we're going to be. So how do you manage the disappointment? How do you manage the frustration? How do you manage being overwhelmed? How do you manage the feedback? I mean, I get feedback all the time. I was doing this presentation in New York recently. One guy looks at me, he's like, I don't like this stuff. And I was like, well, I don't like you. So not a problem. We don't have to work together. I gave a talk recently at my own university to the surgeons in one department. And right after my presentation was over, the surgeon stands up and I'm waiting for him to compliment me. And he's like, what has happened to Yale? I was like, wow. I was like, okay, keep going. And then he goes, this is Yale. We're about producing Nobel laureates, not nice people. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And then I said, does anybody else feel any different? And of course it got worse. This other guy who raised his hand, he goes, I've learned in my work, sometimes you got to be an asshole. Then people just shut up and do what you tell them to do. And I looked over at the chair of this big department. I'm like, is this like a movie being made right now? like where the hell am I? So in life, when we're trying to be creative, we're trying to do the things that we think are important, there's going to be a million people that are going to get in the way. And the question is, do we have the strategies to persevere? And do we have the strategies to manage the difficult emotions that come up for us as we're trying to create something? So that leads us to this whole model of what do you do about it? And what I've learned is that if you want to do great work in terms of this idea of emotional intelligence, first we've got to get people on the bus. Do you believe that emotions matter? And I'm not sure we're in a nation that believes that how people feel matters. I think that we're a couple hundred years behind, unfortunately. And you see that all the time. I had a student last semester who goes so now you're asking me to put plot myself on your mood meter on my to-do list? I'm like, yeah, actually, if you want to take my class, guess what? You're going to be checking in with your feelings pretty regularly. And there's so much resistance to this idea of like infusion of emotion, right? So step one, I think, is mindset. What I've learned also is that if you're trying to do good work, you really can't just train one person, or in schools, like the third grade teacher is going to do this in their classroom. It doesn't make any sense. It's got to be infused into the system so that it changes the DNA in many ways. But it's not just about the skills, it's about the climate. So you can put someone with skills into a toxic environment, but then they have no opportunity to express those skills. So in my research, what we're finding is that when you simultaneously focus on the skill building and also creating a more healthy emotional climate, you get great outcomes. All right. So that means we've got to first develop the skills. I'd like you to take a moment and think of someone who you know who is emotionally wise. Does anyone know someone who you would say is like the personification of emotional intelligence? What are those skills? What do you think? Just let's hear real quickly. What do you think are the skills of the emotionally intelligent person? Yeah.
Listening.
They're a good listener. All right, what else? Attentive. Empathy. Curious. Calm.
I mean, in a way, you need a lot of personal experience too.
Personal experience.
State control.
State control.
Time before they respond.
Time for the response. Sense of humor.
Equanimous.
Say it again.
Equanimous. Equanimity.
Equanimity. Suspending judgment.
Not impulsive.
Not impulsive. Anything else come up?
I think they understand themselves.
They understand themselves. So can we get more granular than that? What are the skills, the underlying abilities of the emotionally intelligent person? So to be a good listener, to be empathic, right? Those are, in many ways, outcomes. What are the underlying skills? Well, because of time, I'll just tell you them. So we call those skills emotional intelligence. And there are 5 basic skills. The first is recognizing emotion. The second is understanding. The third is labeling. The fourth is expressing. And the fifth is regulating. So let's jump through them. Thank you. Which is the name of my model. This guy's good. Recognizing emotion. So we understand emotion through identifying thoughts and feelings, through paying attention to other people's facial expressions, body language, vocal tone. Now, it's interesting. Not all emotion concepts are emotions per se. So let's try the vocal tone one. That's a nice one. I had a stressful time, just so you know, getting here. I was in Mexico doing a presentation. It was a little frustrating getting here. Could use a little compassion. So I'd like to see if Googlers can generate the sound of compassion. On the count of 1, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I don't think that was universal, just so you know. That was like 4 of you. All right, let's try it again. On the count of 1, the sound of compassion. 3, 2, 1. Oh, that was pretty good, right? All right, now let's say you're like, I can't stand this guy, I'm disgusted. On the count of 1, disgust. 3, 2, 1. Now you're like, oh my goodness, this is like, I've never seen anything like this. You are in awe. 3, 2, 1. Oh, that's pretty good. Now you are feeling deep love for me. Like just the love that there are no words for your love. On the count of 1, the sound of love. 3, 2, 1. All right, so that was different. Why was it that you were able to have pretty good tone for compassion and awe and disgust, but love was a little off?
Don't feel that often.
You don't feel it that often? All right, well, we'll work on that. Anyone else? What do you think? I'm sorry? It's a more complex emotion? It's a private emotion. So there are private and public emotions, you think? All right.
Well, some of the other ones you mentioned were more instantaneous, so there's a direct reaction to surprise, concern.
Yeah.
But love is not an immediate reaction to the last thing you said. It has duration of time.
So the question, let's try another one. Let's imagine you're looking at me like, I want this guy to come live with me. You are feeling desire like you've never felt it before. On the count of one, the sound of desire. 3, 2, 1. All right, well, at least it makes me feel a little better. It's the only way I get it nowadays, right? I got to ask for it. That was maybe too much information, but anyway. So love maybe is more of a feeling, not an emotion. Whereas surprise is an automatic response to a stimulus that causes a shift in our behavior, in our physiology, and our cognition. Where love is more complex. It's more of a feeling. But desire is more like an emotion because it's an automatic response to a stimulus. So it helps us get this language for emotion, right? Is it a mood? Is it a feeling? Is it emotion? And we want to recognize all of the above. The second is understanding emotion. Why am I having these feelings? Where are they coming from? How is what I'm feeling influencing my thinking, my judgments and behavior? So here's an easy one for all of you. I'm going to ask you to differentiate two emotions. How many of you have heard of the words anger and disappointment?
All the time.
Good. I want to know from you, you've got 30 seconds, make it 20 now, to differentiate the two. What is the actual difference in what makes someone feel angry as opposed to disappointment? Who feels they've got it? We have one confident person. All right, I'm going to go with you in the back.
Energy.
The energy, what does that mean?
So withdrawing, avoidant.
Okay, so you're talking about the energy factor. I want to further push that to say what's the underlying difference in the causal pieces of it? What makes you go to anger versus disappointment? How about you?
Disappointment implies some acceptance.
Okay, back there. And anger?
Doesn't have to be based on anything.
Okay, you just get angry at everything? I can get angry at the drop of anything. Yes.
That's my secret.
Seems anger has a physiological response,
Uh-huh.
flush of adrenaline or something like that.
All right. I've called on you. Everybody, I want someone over there. What do we think? Let's stop the presentation now. How many of you are walking out of here thinking, I got the difference? It's interesting, isn't it? Like, these are two words that we use all the time, but yet when we try to get to the granularity of understanding their differences, it becomes more complex. So disappointment has to do with unmet expectations. Right? I thought it was going to work this way. I thought I was going to get the A. Everything was legit, though, and I just didn't make it. Anger tends to have a theme of injustice or unfairness. Right? That was not fair. How could you say that? How could you do that? How many of you believe that there are people who are feeling disappointment but expressing it in a way that looks like anger? What do you think? Happens all the time. I was one of those kids. So I went to karate to become like this tough guy. As you can see, it worked really well. And I came home, and because I failed my yellow belt test, I was like devastated. I mean, I was like really not in a good place. Come home, I look at my parents. I hate you. How could you make me go to karate? I hate you. I'm never going to karate. I'm not even going to school tomorrow. Blah, blah, blah. And my parents did what they knew how to do. My mother says, you can't talk to me that way. Go to your room. Wait till your father gets home. Great. Father gets home. I thought I told you never to talk to your mother that way. You know, Mark, for crying out loud, I've had it. Right? Not once did anyone say, so like, what happened? Like, how are you feeling, son? And so I got punished for being aggressive, but no one actually knew how I was feeling. Now, it could have been, like, it looked like I was angry. It could have been one of a million stories. One, I just didn't do well on the test. Two is, the bully said to me, we knew you weren't going to pass the test. We're going to get you tomorrow morning on the way to school. I mean, a million things could be underneath the behavior. And what happens in our world is that we work we spend way too much time judging behavior and attributing emotions to the behavior as opposed to really understanding what the feeling and emotion is. Which is why we need vocabulary. We say we have to name it to tame it. Because if I'm disappointed, how you support me will be very different than if I'm angry. Which leads to our rules around expressing emotion. The context. Is it appropriate? Is it inappropriate? And many things influence that. Your personality influences it. Your cultural background, your race, your gender, your own upbringing. So I have 2 older brothers who are great guys, and they don't really know what I do. They're 11 and 8 years older than I am. So by the time I was like 7 or 8, they were out of the house. We are close friends now, but they convinced that basically what Marc does is he makes money by thinking in coffee shops. And I was like, I actually have a real career, guys. Like I write papers, I teach. So I said, come on to hear me speak. And they came to New York to one of my presentations. First 15 minutes, it was like really cool. Like my 2 older brothers, they were looking at me, that's my brother. About 20 minutes in, all of a sudden I see my one brother looking at my other brother like this. Like really not in a good place. And I realized afterwards that it was at the point where I was saying I've been bullied. It was after the point I was talking about my neurotic mother and my angry father and my 2 brothers. And so at the end of my talk, I went up to my brother. I'm like, so guys, my brother said, he was like really pissed. He's like, don't even walk out with me. I'm like, are you serious? He's like, you share way too much. You're too vulnerable. I'm like, Dave, like I'm the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. Like, if I can't talk about my feelings, no one's going to talk about their feelings. And he's like, and I, you know, and he went on and on. And then the last thing he said was something like, and you know what? People are going to see you as being weak, which is fascinating to me. That because I shared so much about being a victim of bullying and how I had all these challenges growing up and my parents were this way, that was going to make people see me as weak. Right? And I remember looking at my one brother, I'm like, Dave, like, I don't know, in my department we call that projection. Right? Like, I'm doing okay, just let you know, I'm doing all right. But it shows me, right, that we all have our rules. Don't we? We have rules about emotion. Do I talk about them? Do I not talk about them? Am I a hugger? I'm not a hugger. Do I give good eye contact? Do I not give eye contact? Is it cultural? Because it is cultural. There's no doubt about it that it's cultural. Which leads us to the last skill of emotional intelligence, which is the big one, which is emotion regulation. Right? What are the strategies that I have available to me to manage all emotions? To not just down-regulate the negative ones, but to up-regulate the ones that I need to achieve a goal. So for example, if you were here and you said, well, I'm in the blue, and I asked you to be in the yellow, what's your strategy for shifting into that place? That's an up-regulating strategy. Most people's conceptions of emotion regulation is that it's regulating down. What we're saying is that it's about preventing unwanted emotions, reducing difficult emotions, initiating ones that you want to have, maintaining emotions that are useful to you that you're experiencing, and even boosting or enhancing emotions. And it's interesting, like right now if I'm stressed out, like let's say I'm looking at your facial expressions, I'm watching Danielle because she's like my boss here, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, is it going well? What do you think? You know, I don't know. And I'm like, ugh. She looked down. Oh my God. And she looked over at her boss and she went, like, oh shit, like it's never gonna work out. I can't be like, I gotta do yoga, right? I can't just start doing yoga right now to deal with my stress levels. I mean, I could, but like it's not gonna work very well.
That was impressive, though.
See that? So, I mean, I could do it, and I just did as a little demo, but I can't really do yoga in the moment to regulate. I've got to have cognitive strategies. Does that resonate with you? So different environments call for a different type of strategizing. And what I've learned in the last 20 years of running around talking about this stuff is that most people, if I say to them, what's your go-to strategy when you're feeling this way to help you manage it? What are you talking about? They don't really have the language for it, nor do they have the tool bag with those strategies in it. And it's kind of my goal is to make sure that everybody has that tool bag, because I know what it's like to not have the tool bag. Has anyone here ever experienced a strong emotion? Has anyone here ever experienced a strong emotion that they didn't regulate very effectively? And how many of you just want to live in that space for the rest of your life, right? It's not a great place to live in, right? So I feel like it's my duty to make sure we teach these things. Now, oh my goodness, there's not much time left. So before we wrap up in the next 3 hours, I've taught you the 5 skills: recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate. Now you know what they are. I'm going to ask you to think, how emotionally intelligent are you? On a scale from 1 to 5. 1, you are emotionally bankrupt. You can't read a person from like right in front of you. You have no strategies to regulate. To 5, you are really skilled. Where would you say you are? How many of you give yourselves a 1? Like you are just emotionally like not skilled. We've got 1 semi-honest person. 2. 3. 4. 5. Okay, it's interesting. I would say the average number is around 3.75. How do you know? I was like, I don't know how I know. How many of you have gotten accurate feedback on your emotion perception ability or your emotion regulation skills? And how do you know that it was accurate, the feedback? What's that? Depends on her emotional intelligence. Right? Think about it. Like, who's giving you the feedback? Right? Like what's that? Yeah, that might be the case, although I've had about 7 therapists in my life. So it's tricky, right? This idea of self-awareness around emotion skills. What my research shows, by the way, is that the correlation coefficient between your self-rated emotional intelligence and your actual emotional skills is about 0. So self-ratings don't go very far in this domain, because it really is about a skill and a mental ability. It's like asking someone how smart they think they are, or asking parents to rate how smart their kids are. Now, what I want to wrap up with for just a few minutes is sharing you what we actually do. So we know from our research that when we measure emotional intelligence as a set of skills, it looks pretty good. Less skilled kids look like this. High skilled kids look like that. We know that when we work with managers and leaders, more skills look pretty good. People like to be around people that have these skills. I just did this huge study with supervisors' emotional intelligence. So think about this. Same amount of work, right? If you have a supervisor who is low in emotional intelligence or high in emotional intelligence, you're working the same. This slide's a little complex, but think about how you feel at work. If your supervisor is low in emotional intelligence, you're feeling inspiration 28% of the time. If they're high, 80%. So how you feel about your work and how you feel at work tends to correlate very highly with the emotional skills of your supervisor. Look at that. Feelings of burnout at work, almost triple. Fear of speaking up. So people are afraid to speak up and to even have an opinion when they have a supervisor who's low in emotional intelligence. Engagement, triple. Finding purpose and meaning at your work. So what we find is that these skills really play out in meaningful and important ways in everyday life. The last thing I'll share with you is, what do we do to develop them? So you got nature and you got nurture. So nature are things like your temperament and personality. Are any of you like me, like people who worry more than you'd like to worry? Yeah, I have that. I was like born with the worry gene. I even worry about why I worry. Anybody else like that? And I'm at a point now in my career, like I worry about why I worry about why I worry. And I'm like, Mark, you're doing fine. You don't have anything to worry about. But then it's like, something will go wrong. So that's my genetics 10 years of therapy, 25 years as a psychologist, 16 curriculum on emotional intelligence, and my default is worry. Nothing has changed my automatic worry, which has been frustrating. It's like, so I've learned that is my temperament, right? That's my personality. What I need are strategies on how to learn how to live better with who I am. Can't change my genetics, but I can change the way I express those feelings and how I regulate them in everyday life. And that's where the nurture piece comes in. It also is influenced by your own development. So guess what? I grew up with a mom who would say things like this to me, "Oh, honey, you're being bullied. Don't tell me the details. I'll have a breakdown." I'm like, "Ma, I'm having the breakdown." It's like, you're my mother. You're supposed to have the strategies. So, and I had a father who was a tough guy from the Bronx who, "Son, get in there." "All right, Dad, that sounds like, yeah, I'm just going to get in there." It's not. I'll never be that. I have a 5th-degree black belt now. I really do. I mean, I could eliminate anyone in this room. But it's not in my genetics. I don't like to fight. I like the techniques. I like the movements. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to touch anybody. So that led me to work for the last 20 years on an approach to teaching these skills. And I'll just spend a very little time on that today, and then hopefully we can get into more detail with some of the teams. We developed tools. We learned that you have to be in an environment where emotions matter, not where rules roll. So we said, all right, why don't we ask people how they want to feel? The second is a tool to build self-awareness and vocabulary and strategies. We also realized that a lot of people have difficulty with triggers, like certain people and certain circumstances that really activate strong emotions. So we developed a tool called the meta moment. Then we realized that we're too self-focused. Right? We live in a world where when conflict arises, it's between and among people. So let's think about that. This is a great principal of a school named Dawn. This is her emotional intelligence charter with her school in Harlem, New York. And they want to feel as a team supported, respected, peaceful, interested, empowered, understood, appreciated, and motivated. So she has no rules in her school, just feelings. And then they say, all right, well, if we want to feel that way, what do we need to do each day in order to have those feelings? What are the specific, measurable, realistic behaviors that we need to do each day to create that emotional climate? So it shows up in many ways. This is another high school in New York. They want to feel balanced and energized. That's where I was just in Mexico. They're much more creative with their charters there. 5th grade classroom here in San Francisco. They want to feel comfortable, confident, creative, focused, ecstatic, respected, and challenged. List goes on. The mood meter helps us build more awareness. So how do you build awareness of emotion? Well, you can learn the facial expressions, the body language, the vocal tones, the physiology, and the behavior that occur in each of these quadrants. You can build that vocabulary. There are 2,000 words that we could plot on the mood meter. We use 2 usually. You could learn how emotions influence your judgments and the way your brain operates. So for example, yellow is great for creative processing, where the green is great for building consensus. You can learn strategies to help you manage the full range of emotions. And you can see that schools adopt these practices in really interesting ways through artwork and other things like that. These are working with the Boys and Girls Clubs across the United States now to build this into after-school programming. We even built an app where you can plot yourself under your heart's delight. So last 2 minutes. Can I ask everyone to just take a moment and read this quote? How many of you feel like your fuse is shorter than it's ever been? Anyone feel that way? Like your stimulus to response is getting tighter and tighter and tighter? That's what we're finding across the states. So we built a tool to help with that. And we say if you take our 6 steps seriously now, you can avoid the 12 steps later. So you are triggered, right? Most people rely on breathing and exercises like that to help them deactivate. But what we've learned is that there's one more piece you can throw in there. We call it seeing your best self. What we've learned is that our nation has, this is a study of thousands of people, they're begging to be more compassionate. They're saying that their best self is someone who is more compassionate. So think about that. You're triggered by someone at work or at home. You go for the automatic response. But if you pause and say, wait a minute, My best self is someone who's more compassionate. Do you think that might guide how you behave following that? Just all nod your heads, because that's what my research shows. It will. Then we have other ways we have to manage conflict, right? We have to realize that it's not just about me, it's about we, and we have to figure out, like, what was the other person actually feeling? You can't do that in the moment. You actually need time to process that. So let me wrap up by saying just two last things. First is we've done pretty big experiments on this work. Randomized trials in 60 places, and have found that in schools, when you do this work, you get better outcomes for students, you get better outcomes for teachers in classroom climates, you get less bullying, and all that great stuff. Can I ask everyone to take one last deep breath with me? Not of your life, but just of this time together. So to wrap up, how many of you believe that emotions matter? Cool. How many of you think that the skills of emotional intelligence are real? How many of you have heard of the thing soft skills? That's how they think of it. What I'm here to tell you is that your brain is replete with emotion and cognition. Our goal is to have those two systems work well together. Oftentimes one has more power than the other. Our nation is one that cares more about cognition than emotion when they're both living simultaneously. So the question is, how do we infuse more emotion into the cognition? Third, it's never too early or too late to develop these skills. I promise you that. Never too early or too late. There's no excuses. I think, fourth, there are creative ways to develop EI, face-to-face and using technology. I've developed an app, for example, as one way to show how technology can support you in tracking your emotions and learning over the course of a week or a month. Wow, I've been in the blue for this long. What do I need to do to shift my life a little bit? And finally, what I'll just say as my little hope for proselytizing moment is that there's so much resistance in our nation right now to taking people's feelings seriously. When I go to schools and I hear teachers say things like, zip it, we're not friends anymore. I'm like devastated by that, to think that like that child is not seen as someone who is a feeling creature, who needs to be respected and supported and developed. And then you go into the workplace and you see people are all stressed and they're feeling frustrated and anger, and there's not a lot of emotional intelligence really brought into the workplace environment. So my primary interest in life is to figure out ways that we can infuse these skills into the way leaders lead and all of us are in relationship. And my hope is that by doing so, we get great outcomes like better health, better relationships, more creativity, and maybe people get to achieve their dreams. Thank you so much.